So speaking about millennials, being one, I read a lot about how we are different than the previous generations, how we care less or we pay less attention or we're more distracted. But there's one thing that really hasn't changed, and that is how passionate we're about soccer and how much soccer is a part of our identity. And so a lot of things change, but the passion for soccer and the way to deeply connect with us millennials, soccer is still there for that. My story of how I got into soccer and how I played and how it played a role in my life is very similar to Marcelo's. We were talking about that yesterday. And so it's a few decades later, but that remains unchanged. And so if we don't pay attention to anything, well, we still pay attention to soccer. So.
Great. Now, Marcelo touched on something earlier. I said in the AYSO there's 3 million kids registered. About half of them are women, which you kind of touched upon. Does that change the strategy at all? The fact that half the kids playing nowadays, half the kids following soccer in the U.S. are women, as opposed to typically it's a male sport.
I guess I'll answer that first. So from a U.S. soccer perspective, the first thing we gravitate is towards men's soccer. We're also a sponsor of U.S. women's soccer. And that itself is a growing sport. Actually, we work very closely with Alex Morgan, so one of the obviously superstars of the team. And what we're finding is that it's absolutely growing in different ways. So the viewership is growing amongst women. For men's and women's soccer, but also the involvement of more women playing soccer continues to grow as well. And one of the things that we also do is just work very closely with them. And it'll be interesting next year as we go into World Cup for women, because that's going to be kind of a different dynamic, and we're still trying to figure that out in terms of what does that mean, or how do we change the strategy, or does it stay the same, because we're potentially tapping into a different demographic there.
And just to expand on that, I think on some level it's also really empowering, right? So this is something that you have that can really be universal, not just by country and not just by area, a sport that's understood, but also just in many ways very gender neutral on a lot of levels. So, in my house there are allegiances. My mom's got her very passionate allegiances. My dad's got his very passionate allegiances, and it's just about where your passions lie and who the teams are you support, and where that comes from a very personal place, whether it's wearing a jersey or like those things are all about pride, and pride doesn't really have a gender. Pride doesn't really have a face. It's a feeling. And it's something that's just rooted very personally. And I think that that's something that exists with an element of soccer that doesn't exist across a lot of levels. I know that, to Patty's point when she was talking about player escort, when we work with a lot of these parents and a lot of these kids and they're starting to talk about messages, the same kinds of insights and things are coming from these young boys, the way they are coming from these young girls. I want to see my player on the field. I want this. So it's not like it gets very specific at that point. It just gets to be very broad at that point. And I don't think you can think of very much else that is that universal, that allows you to reach so many people on a very personal level at the same time in the same way.
Just to expand a little further on women, I think look at the example of how powerful this sport, since Title IX really opened the door for women in this country when it came to sports. And since the evolution, look how it became an avenue for girls to play and be able to play soccer, because they didn't have many other sports to play at the collegiate level. They could aspire to play collegiately, they could go and beyond that. Then we had a professional league here that has returned. So there's a demand for it, and that's because there's so many girls playing and they're coming up. This generation is going to be a fabulous generation. I think it's a big opportunity as we look at how to target Hispanic people. Hispanic bicultural people do not forget women, and quite frankly, we know that 9 times out of 10 they're the decision makers in every household. So,
And a great example of that would be Unilever created this campaign called Tu Selección that is targeted towards the mom. Right, and so that's a great example because they're also paying attention. A lot of the times they're the ones hosting everybody coming over. They're the ones putting together everything for that, and so they're paying attention. And to just assume that they are not really the ones making everything happen and paying attention to soccer is to just stay on that mentality that it's only guys who pay attention. No, women are playing it, they're watching it, they're living it, and they are passionate about it on the field and off the field, and they're definitely paying attention, and it should be something that you consider whenever you're doing a soccer strategy.
Now, speaking of strategies, there's a lot of companies have different departments that handle, say, U.S. Hispanic versus U.S. general market versus Latin American clients. They have different strategies, sometimes different budgets even. Now, how is soccer a vehicle that can handle broad-based, that handle everything, handle U.S. Hispanic, Latin American market, and even the general market?
Should I? Okay, sure. We'll keep it going in this sequence, I guess. At least for McDonald's, for us, we are a global sponsor of FIFA, so obviously we will have the world engaged in terms of how we market the sport. Specifically in the U.S., this is actually for us. We've always, obviously, not to this level, we're just going to take it to the next level. We're going to amplify it here in the U.S. because we recognize the opportunity to continue to grow it. So that's just one of the things in terms of how we're looking at it. Obviously, it's a very holistic plan, as we talk about all the time. Integrated, I know it's our two favorite buzzwords, but but it truly is. I mean, the media landscape has changed so much. All of you know this. That's why you're here, right? So it's not just about watching the game and having your 30-second spots anymore. It's about that real-time social engagement. It's about rooting your team on. It's about all the elements that really make this program come to life. The grassroots efforts. And shameless plug here, but this year we have 1,400 player escorts that will participate in the World Cup. In the U.S., we will have 25 children from the U.S. participating. If you're interested, unless you're affiliated with McDonald's, you cannot participate. But if you're not, mcd1gold.com, actually, it's a sweepstakes, and we are actually doing that now. The deadline is Sunday. That's the only reason I mention it. So it's about 4 more days. But I mean, talk about a marketing campaign that is about the stories and trip of a lifetime. These children are going to go to Brazil for 4 days and not only walk on the field of World Cup, but also, go perhaps maybe for the first time get on a plane, maybe for the first time leave the United States. So it's just such an emotional tie-in in terms of how we want to continue to tell the story beyond the traditional marketing vehicles that we typically use.
What's the age limit?
6 to 10.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
And they can only take one guardian.
So I know that McDonald's is definitely taking a holistic approach to the soccer properties that they have. Amazing ones, by the way. But I know that it happens a lot of times where maybe a company is getting some opportunities in soccer and they look to their Hispanic marketing side and they say, okay, you handle this. Just assuming that because it's soccer, it should be the perfect vehicle for Hispanic marketing and not for the general market. But there's plenty of examples. I mean, if we're talking about youth players, a lot of these youth players are not necessarily Hispanic. How many American kids are playing and then grew up to be fans of the sports? If you look at the deal that NBC signed with the Premier League for the rights of that, and they're showing the games on NBC in English and they're performing really well. If you look at some of the latest markets that have been really successful in MLS, you got Portland, you got Seattle, and so it's a myth that it's only a Hispanic sport. It's a very important passion point for Hispanics, but there's definitely a huge opportunity to reach the general market, and so it shouldn't just be soccer is Hispanic, but yes, you can activate Hispanic in particular thanks to soccer properties, but you should also consider it as a holistic approach to really hit the general market as well, and not just take it for granted that it's not going to work.
And just to add to that, I think that it's probably pretty important to note, I think, a couple things about the program and the promotion that we're working on here. This is one part of an extremely expansive program for our brand. So, player escort is a huge passion point because it's a really great sentimental story. But we continue to integrate across agencies, across brands, across teams. There are actually 4 different teams and functions within our corporation in the U.S. alone that are managing elements of world soccer. So, so I think that when you look at it, I think that this is kind of just one step of many steps. And I think that the months will continue to reveal themselves, and a lot of our efforts will continue to really kind of come to life. But this is marketing driven, this is communications driven, this is sports marketing driven, because there's another arm just about sports. This is sponsorship and celebrity driven. There's like so many different elements because everyone has a vested interest in this passion point. Because I think, at least for us as a brand, this is a priority point, not just from a sponsorship level, but from a personal passion level in order to engage with our customers. And it comes to life on a localized level. Patty flying in from Phoenix last night and working in the local soccer camp, that takes it to a very localized level as well. So it's extremely expansive, and I know that we're not the only brand that does that. I'm sure, there are many brands that do that, but I know that that's how it's coming to life for Matano specifically.
Just to touch from a property rights holder's perspective, integration not only inside a company is important, but integration from our perspective is understanding who are all of the leaders within an organization that have that decision-making capacity. Because when we manage global properties, you need to know who is the director of Hispanic marketing or multicultural marketing. You need to know who manages Latin America. If it's a global property, who handles global marketing. And then, so all of these, and then who manages marketing as a whole or brand, because they're all invested in this, and because they're all integrated as a team, we have to make sure that we can come in and also try to reach out to all of them, because we know that each one of them manage different budgets, and sometimes because of the threshold to be able to participate and buy the rights of a FIFA property, of a Gold Cup property, Copa America property, you're talking 7 to 8 digit figures just for the rights. So where do these funds come from? They can't sometimes just come from a smaller a company that has a small Hispanic budget, but it has to come from their global and U.S. marketing, general market teams as well, if they can leverage it. So that's the challenge we face as a property rights holder.
Yeah, I'm going to direct this one to Marcelo, since he's more on from the agency side. Television. I know you all love soccer, and it's easy to sell soccer because of your love for it, and it's very easy to tell our guests here, yes, soccer is a good vehicle tool. But what do your brands that work with you use for ROI, and what do you use to show them the ROI on a property, on an event, or in soccer in general?
Well, there's a lot of metrics that are used today, and I think it's gotten savvier. And back in the day, back in the 90s, it was all about brand exposure, and essentially people were just leveraging the media signage on the television boards, and they would leverage a little hospitality because they wanted to bring their VIPs in for the big event and schmooze them. But now it's become totally 360, and that's why brands like McDonald's, Coke, Visa, you can see what they've done, and that's why they renew these sponsorships and make an investment in these huge numbers, millions of dollars, and they're putting the whole organization behind it vertically there, and it's because they understand that you need to harness all these resources and dollars to really get the ROI you're looking for. The metrics can be as simple as brand awareness to activation to engaging more customers. There's a whole new world now with new media, which is where I think is the big shift, and that's coming. And it's not just television anymore, the integration of television, because you have to also go out and buy your television package separate from your rights package. So by the time you invest in that and you invest in the rights, what's left in your budget to do activation, to do experiential marketing, to reach your customers through social media and digital channels. So the companies that I think are the models for the future and the case studies are the ones that are the FIFA sponsors that have put their whole organization behind it. They bought into it. They realize that soccer is the sport that resonates from a sports perspective to their consumers, and it's 360. They go to all the touch points so that they can engage their customers.
So now, McDonald's, how do you use ROI? How do you measure ROI?
Well, I think there's several different ways, obviously, of that. I mean, for the most part, I mean, we are a publicly traded company, so we do measure guest counts and sales. Obviously, from that perspective, that's important. But other than that, I think for us, it's building that passion, you know, with our Hispanic consumer, not just Hispanic, and I'll rephrase that, with overall our consumer, because it really is evolving. I focus so much on Hispanic that's where my mind goes initially, but just with our consumer in general, that we are providing, as Marcelo says, you know, that 360 touch point, that we are you know, there to live their passion and to really be able to do some of that. And a lot of that sometimes is non-tangible. We don't necessarily have a number, or we can't necessarily quantify it. A lot of it is it's so fresh in my mind. It's the story of the mom coming and kissing me and hugging me and saying, oh my gosh, thank you for doing this for my son. And it's the post and the tweets from last night saying this was just a lifetime experience. So that's ROI as well, because you know, these are experiences that many of these consumers are going to take with them, perhaps for the rest of their lives.
And honestly, at the end of the day, those are the kinds of responses that get people to feel invested and committed and related to your brand. When people have the opportunity, and we're just one of many brands and partners and sponsorships that are involved with something as global as soccer, but when people have an opportunity to spend, you know, their money or their time or their resources kind of going anywhere and choosing from anywhere, they want to know that the people in turn and the brands in turn that are going to be doing things are relevant and related to them. You know, people have options, people have choices, and it's up to them to spend. Where do you spend your hard-earned money? You want to spend your hard-earned money with brands that are engaging and are relevant to you in many other places, or that you can rely on or you trust, whether it's buying an Apple product because you trust the brand, or whether it's, you know, it's you're really looking at a brand for all of its package and how you can engage with them on more than one level, and that is really what we're all about and what we're committed to. So that child and advocacy, if that's going to cause you to come into a restaurant another time, mission accomplished. So I think that on that level, sometimes it's more than the numbers, but more than the long-term ROI of what the traffic is going to be when we get to look at that later and say, you know what, this has allowed us to create that affinity or preserve that affinity that will continue to drive people back to us.
Now, Ignacio, they both Marcelo and actually Janina and Patty all touched on social media. Since you're you know, in charge of social media is free, right? You just open up a Facebook account and a Twitter, and you're done. Is that
Yeah, you
correct?
get a 20-year-old intern to just tweet for you, and then that would be great.
Tell us how social media can be used.
I mean,
Best way.
it can be used in many ways. Sometimes a client will come say, we need to be on social media, and then you gotta say, okay, but what are you trying to get out of it? No, we need to be on Twitter, on Facebook, everywhere, even on Pinterest if maybe your target audience is not even there. But the idea is, let's take a step back and understand, okay, what are you doing somewhere else that social media can complement or can, you know, do the thing that you're not able to do in other touch points? So for example, a brand can be interested in using social media for customer service, or they might be interested in using social media to support the awareness of the particular campaign. So for example, if you have a huge following on social media, you can use that to drive people to your activations. Or if you're a channel, you can drive people to remember to turn on the TV and watch your show or the game. So it can be tuned in, or just engagement, right? You can say they're watching the game on TV or they're coming to these experiences, and then I'm continuing that every day through what I'm posting online. So it really, really depends on what they're trying to do, but for you to be able to do that, it's important to use social media and really listen, because you might go in with one strategy, I'm going to use social media for customer service, but then you realize that you're missing an opportunity to drive tune in or something like that. So social media can be used in whichever way you want to, but you need to be listening, because sometimes it's your customer who's going to tell you how you should be using social media. You go into Twitter thinking you're going to use it just to talk, and then you realize that you should actually be listening and responding. And so for social media to be effective, first you need to be able to recognize that it's the customer who's going to tell you how you should be using it, and then really have a whole team that is integrated in all the organization. It's not just a small team in the marketing department. It's not just a couple people in the PR department. If they're not able to really be integrated throughout the whole organization, it's not possible for them to really integrate with all those other things that a brand might be doing around soccer.
Great.
Can
Now,
I just add something? I think social media and the digital new media is the most disruptive form of media that's ever in our generation. I think it's the coolest thing that's ever happened. I think it's going to be the trend of the future. And if you're a dinosaur, people my age, and you don't change, that you're going to really miss the boat. If you're leading departments or companies, this is where it's at. Everybody here has a mobile device. Everybody is connected to the world through their mobile device now. They're not watching television on television screens anymore. They're watching their shows on these devices. My daughter goes to bed with a little device. She can't take it away from her hand, and she's watching something on Netflix in a little screen this big. I don't understand it, but they're doing it. That's the behavior nowadays, and they're connected to the web. And Hispanics especially are more likely to use a tablet or a mobile device to connect to the world, more so than any other population in the United States. So leverage that medium as much as you can.
And social media shouldn't be just an afterthought of, okay, we created this campaign for TV or for activations, and then how do we translate this into social media? But from the second you start that campaign, you should have social media and mobile in mind, because it's just a different way of doing things. I'm doing things differently, and I'm living my games differently thanks to Twitter, and my tablet while I'm watching completely different than somebody from a different generation. So if you're trying to use social media, make sure that it's something that you're considering from the start, not just kind of like an afterthought to wrap up your campaign.
Now, Marcelo, you mentioned a little while ago 6-7 figures. McDonald's, you mentioned a global campaign. So that might scare some of these folks away. You know, what does a company do that doesn't have those big budgets? What can they do? How can they use soccer to still engage the audience and still reach the audience they want to reach using soccer?
I guess I'll start. It goes back to that local level and that community involvement, you know, and I know I'm touching on this a lot, but definitely there's areas that you can support youth soccer leagues, and you're obviously in your DMAs and your local communities. You could get involved with, you know, just some of the up and coming, you know, type of growing, we were talking about women, you know, women in sports, another great opportunity. So you don't necessarily have to, you know, just go in and buy those sponsorships, and you're absolutely right. It is an investment. And it's something that we look at very carefully as well, and you know, obviously looking at it, what kind of impact it's going to have. But honestly, the best way to really reach, especially as Ignacio was talking about millennials nowadays, you know, where it has to be genuine and authentic, and we can't be trying to sell you something. It's got to be something that you truly believe that we're invested in, and truly, you know, and I know we're the corporate people here, but we truly are invested in this program, and we, on a local level, you know, you just being in Phoenix, there's a lot of things we did yesterday, in the last 2 days actually, that wouldn't have happened without the local involvement and the local communities and the organizations that we reached out to bring these kids to participate in these events, and honestly the consumers at the end of the day.
I think that a lot of times social media can provide a way to, you know, be a topic of conversation around something, a property that you don't own. If you're doing something right, you might be engaging with people online, and they remember your message, and maybe not the one that was on LED board or the one that is the official sponsor. You might not be a sponsor of the team, but you might be a sponsor of a player, and if that player is scoring, are you ready to celebrate that? Are you really looking at, can I only talk about the things that I'm an official sponsor of? I know it can get tricky with rights, but there's a certain way that you can approach things to be ready to engage people even on things that you don't sponsor, and just keep the conversation going. And because some of the official sponsors might not be doing a good job, you on social media and online, you really have an opportunity to leverage that even better than the official sponsor, because you were really planning on social media, you really think about that all the time. You're really integrating that across your organization, and once that becomes second nature inside your organization, you can leverage everything. You're not even going to focus on whether you are the official sponsor or not, whether you have a presence or not, because on social media, you're free to really talk about whatever you want.
Let me just add that because in my case, since we manage multi-million-dollar properties, you're excluding many companies. The threshold is very high, and but there are tiered events from FIFA all the way down to grassroots tournaments that you can be a part of and have your brand associated with. And many companies start from the ground up rather than trying to become a sponsor of an event like FIFA that probably won't happen in our lifetime because there's only a few sponsors, and unless they do not renew, then there's never going to be a door open for you. And secondly, you need to have $150 million or more to just buy the rights. So that excludes 99% of the companies. But there are other championships that are regional. I don't want to plug what we do, but we have regional sponsorships that we do at the international level with CONCACAF and with CONMEBOL. There are club level professional teams that you can drill down to in your markets. There are collegiate level opportunities. There are then the tournament level, and then there are the grassroots youth teams that you can sponsor. You've got your optimist and your dentist who sponsors a team, but you can also have brands that can start to creep into certain markets, and they can start from the ground up and build a relationship with the sport. And I think that's probably one of the most effective, quite frankly, starting from the ground up. Because you want brand loyalty early, and the way you do it is by reaching your customer when they're young children, and they'll be influenced by the brand at that point and become loyal.
Now, I had a whole bunch more questions that told me we're almost out of time. So is there any final comments you would like to add before we break?
I think one thing that I would say is that when it comes to soccer, all the stars need to align. And I say that in the sense of, whether you're activating on the ground, tapping into social, engaging offline, you kind of need to have a very, very full picture, and all the ducks should be in a row. It can't just live in one medium. You have to be consistent, you have to be authentic, and you have to ensure that you are at the end of the day, it's all about putting whoever your target audience is top of mind and playing into that passion point. And that passion point should be resonating from what you're marketing and activating on the ground to how you're talking about it in any space that you're in.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I will say that, we're obviously very involved with soccer, but we are very passionate about it internally as well. We definitely live it. We have very robust conversations in terms of how can we just take this to the next level, because not only our passion for the sport, but our passion for the consumer. Because we absolutely want to reach the consumer on that level, and we want to create those memorable experiences. So again, just want to kind of reiterate that point. And don't forget to register for mcd1golf.com. Just saying.
Register your kids, by the way.
Your kids, 6 to 10.
I'm just going to add that the future of soccer in this country, and that's why we're here today, is very bright. If you leave with any message, it's just that be encouraged by the fact that if you're looking to use this platform in terms of sport, there's no better sport to reach the U.S. Hispanic audience, your Latin American audience. It's the number one sport, and women are, and especially in this country with the women and girls that play. I just think, with the recent poll on the ESPN where it showed that the 12 to 24-year-olds now participate and on the level of and are as interested in MLS as they are in Major League Baseball. That tells you something there with our national pastime that's been around for over 100 years. And in a short, quick time, MLS now has captured the same fan base appeal, especially in those 12 to 24-year-olds. So that's pretty encouraging.
I would say that brands shouldn't be afraid to evolve their messages. There's a certain kind of way to engage online. There's specific kinds of humor. There's specific kinds of talking. It's not only the platforms, but the way that people communicate through them. Don't just take your message and put it on social media, but have some leeway of really understand how your customer is engaging with that message, and don't be afraid to tweak it and make it work for us guys that are just getting it online, because it's got its own way of going about it. So it's exactly the message you put out is not going to be interpreted the same way online. Sometimes it will kind of evolve on its own, and you should be ready to take those messages, learn from that, and take that into account when doing your campaigns. And it's actually a good thing.
All right, well, thank you very much to everyone for attending. I'm sure our panelists will be around for a couple minutes if you have any further questions.